At the end of the previous video, we introduced the idea that a ribbon-like arrow can be used to explore some of the basic principles of depth, our third dimension, and that this third dimension can be conveyed when drawing on a flat two-dimensional surface. This exercise, which we call organic arrows, or just arrows for short, is conceptually simple in that it's pretty much just drawing arrows on a page, but it does incorporate some considerations that can be challenging to implement, especially at first. To start, let's look at the basic mechanics of what we want you to do, then we'll look at those more challenging considerations one at a time. Be sure to go over the entire video first, before attempting the exercise. Engaging your whole arm from the shoulder, draw a smoothly flowing line that zigzags back and forth a couple times before lifting your pen, as you see here. Using your whole arm is especially important because this kind of zigzagging stroke is considerably more demanding than you're used to, and will benefit from as much range of motion as we can give it. Additionally, once you're comfortable drawing from your shoulder, you'll find that it'll work as something of a stabilizer, allowing you to maintain the confidence of your stroke at somewhat lower speeds. A little later into the video, we'll talk about what one might consider in terms of how to lay out this zigzagging stroke, but for now, all we're concerned with is having it go back and forth in this smoothly flowing manner. There's one question I keep expecting to get, but that never comes up, that I do want to briefly address here. It has to do with our third principle of mark making, which states that marks must maintain a consistent trajectory. The examples for this one actually include zigzagging marks, so it can seem that what I'm asking for here directly contradicts that principle of mark making. But in truth, it's a bit more of a gray area. There are two reasons we approach it in this continuous fashion here instead of breaking it down into separate segments. Firstly, unlike the zigzagging mark in the example, this one is much more fluid with larger continuous gaps between the points that turn back on themselves, which reduces the issue the principle is meant to avoid. Secondly, while we do introduce students to a technique for building up more complex lines with separate segments such that they flow together seamlessly in Lesson 3's branches exercise, basically like a more structured, controlled approach to what Chicken Scratch attempts to achieve, introducing too many things at the same time can result in one's attention being split between different elements of an exercise. So we find that for this exercise, it works best to execute the mark in one go. The next step is very similar to the previous one. We're drawing another edge, matching the first one, a little offset from it. That alone, the fact that we're attempting to match the path of an existing edge, can make this step considerably more stressful for students. You're going to be tempted to draw your marks slowly and steadily, steering them with your eyes, but don't give in to it. Per our second principle of mark making, all of our marks must flow smoothly, meaning they should be executed with confidence. You may make mistakes, and that's fine. This is an exercise, and exercises are all about the process, not the result. Always remember that. If you alter the process to achieve a better result in the short term, you're changing the exercise itself and will likely miss out on its long-term benefits. Similarly to step 1, later in the video we'll talk about additional factors to consider in how we draw the second edge. To take our parallel-ish edges and turn them into a three-dimensional structure, all that needs doing is to close it off with these edges going across from one to the other. The end of the ribbon should be pretty straightforward, and you can choose either extremity for this. Finding the correct placement of edges to close off the zigzags can be trickier, but it is something you'll get more used to the more you do it. If you wish, you can close off the other end in the same manner, or you can add an arrowhead. I find the arrowheads can be useful in further emphasizing how this structure represents a trajectory passing through space, instead of simply existing statically within it. Additionally, you can add some basic hatching, stretching lines across the width of our ribbon from one edge to the other as shown here to help us clarify our overlaps. While we do talk about how we can employ line weight to clarify overlaps back in Lesson 1, you don't need to add it here if you don't want to. If you do, however, be sure to follow the process and priorities explained in the line weight video from Lesson 1, which I'll link in the description. As usual, the remaining step is to do steps 1 to 3 many times over, filling your page. Don't be too worried about your arrows overlapping one another. I don't want you cutting any of your edges off to account for it. Just let them go right over the other. Additionally, drawing each arrow structure fairly large will help you engage your whole arm from the shoulder and will also engage more of the part of your brain responsible for spatial reasoning. Conversely, drawing really small and cramped will work against you, so avoid that. Before actually tackling the exercise, we have a couple of additional considerations to look at, both of which relate to how foreshortening and perspective is applied to our arrow to convey the depth of the scene. For now, the arrow we've drawn looks something like this. It doesn't have much in the way of foreshortening applied to it. Here's what it'll look like when foreshortening is applied more correctly to both the positive space of the arrow and its negative space. Positive space refers to the physical structures that you're drawing. So in this case, it refers to the ribbon itself and how foreshortening is applied to the width of the ribbon structure as it moves farther back in space. As we know, the core of perspective is that as things move farther away from the viewer, they appear smaller. For our positive space, that's going to manifest in the distance across the width span of the ribbon appearing smaller the farther we look back. As we draw our second edge, we want to try and place it closer to the initial edge further to the back, making the ribbon appear narrower there, and further away from the initial edge as it approaches the viewer, all while still having the edges follow a similar path to one another. To put this more simply, our edges will run parallel to one another on the page, except that the distance between them should shrink the further back from the viewer they go. This one can be a bit trickier to grasp. Where the positive space refers to the physical structure of the arrow or ribbon itself, the thing that you're actually drawing, negative space refers to the gaps in between it. These gaps also represent distances in 3D space, and so they are also subject to getting smaller as we look farther back. It can, however, be trickier to think about since our brains are more used to thinking about the world in terms of positive space, and there aren't a ton of situations where we'd naturally consider the gaps between things. As a logical extension of the gaps between our zigzagging portions shrinking as we look farther back, you're going to end up with the parts of the ribbon itself overlapping each other, and this is something students are more hesitant to do, especially when they're not told to in advance. It is, however, a completely natural result of foreshortening and perspective, and when we actively try to avoid it, it can cause things to look weird. Overlaps are a very effective tool for creating a sense of depth. Even if you had completely separate objects with no connection to one another, drawing them overlapping can convey a much stronger sense of the depth in the scene compared to having them sit side by side, even with those farther back being smaller, as shown here. This technically relates more to the fundamental of composition, which is outside of the scope of this course. But for our purposes here, just remember that overlaps can be a good and useful thing, so if you feel a natural urge to avoid them, that is something to purposely work against. As many of you know, Drawabox is a completely free resource that delivers a ton of value on a very limited budget. While one of the major ways students support our efforts is by signing up to our Patreon and allowing some of their official critique credits to expire, checking out the courses, tools, and books listed on our recommendations page is also an excellent way to help us out. When a student uses one of our links to Amazon in Canada and the United States, or Proco.com, and makes a purchase, we get paid a commission that helps us out considerably. So, if you're interested in checking out other courses and books, our curated recommendations are a great place to start. The link will be in the description below.